There's a lot of people that wonder what's a bottom? What is rock bottom? What does that metaphor mean when it comes to drug addiction and recovery? And I will talk about my own story to try to convey what I think rock bottom is. So, the last 6 months of my addiction were lived in such a way that I couldn't imagine my life with drugs and I couldn't imagine my life without drugs. And that's a very hard place to be in because you do not have your solution to make you feel okay in the world anymore. For me, drugs were an attempt to feel present. They were an attempt to feel good, happy, okay in my own skin. But also, they were no longer shutting the internal dialogue down within myself. That negative self-talk, that fear, that hatred, that toxic shame. The drugs were no longer quieting that vicious voice, and there was also a lot of external consequences of my drug use. And the negatives were far outweighing the benefits. To an average person, there are no amount of benefits that could ever outweigh the negatives of drug use. But for addicts, there are many things that drugs do for us, like make us feel happy. I feel more like myself when I'm on drugs when I'm not. They help me cope with trauma, PTSD, my feelings towards myself and others. All of these negative things are alleviated. And like I said, when those benefits were so minuscule compared to the negatives, I still couldn't stop. I didn't have the willpower to stop. And that's where people say that they are powerless. There is no amount of resolve, there is no amount of willpower that I could muster that would be sufficient enough to curtail my drug use and stop it. There were many times that I was crying on my way to go pick up fentanyl from Trenton, New Jersey. There was times where I was crying to pick up methamphetamine over the border in Pennsylvania. And on a soul level, I wanted to stop so deeply. I couldn't imagine my life anymore with drugs, but I couldn't imagine my life without drugs. It had been so long. The person that I thought I was or who I remembered myself to be was so gone, had been missing for a decade and a half, that when I started having these feelings that I couldn't imagine my life with drugs, I couldn't imagine my life without it, because who would I be going back to? Who would I be? I have no idea who I am. I have no idea what I like. I have no idea what I stand for. And I had also worked myself into a corner where the people in my life, I mean, of course, water seeks its own level. The people in my life were also like me. And so how can I imagine a life without drugs when even removing the drugs wouldn't be enough to remove all the drugs? My friends were doing it, my girlfriend was doing it, family. And so that was very dark because there's no solution. There's not even hope. I mean, in hindsight, there's definitely hope, obviously, but to the addicted mind, or even to a person suffering with that deep human condition, there's no solution. And so I'm there without a solution. I don't have the drugs to quiet that toxic internal dialogue, but I also don't have the ability to stop and live a life that would turn me into a man that I used to dream of. And so I would start to contemplate suicide. I was in what a lot of recovery programs talk as what they referred to as the jumping off point. It was either accept that I am human garbage, that I'm destined for active addiction for the rest of my life, or it was to consider that perhaps God could help me. And I had traveled enough to Trenton, I had traveled enough to Pennsylvania, I had just enough pain to where my ego was checkmated and there was no one else to blame. There was no more con to pull. There was no more delusion that I could hide behind. There wasn't another ounce or gram or speck of drugs that was going to help me. And I saw that at my very best, I'm a detriment to myself. That at my very best, I use drugs in a suicidal manner. That at my very best, I produce so much chaos in my life. At my very best, I treat myself like human filth. And so the ego saw that I'm literally a detriment to myself. I don't know how to live life. I can't live life. I can't stop. And that realization is a deafening silence. And this is sort of like a metaphor, but also literally as well. A deafening silence of like being defeated. And sometimes that is so much that a person goes deeper into hell. And sometimes there is a speck of hope that maybe God or something, anything could maybe help me. For me, it was God. And I went out into the woods, and when I used to use a lot of methamphetamine, I would just get naked. So I got naked. I went out into the woods. This was on my parents' property. They weren't home. That's a whole nother story of why I was naked at my parents' house. And I prayed. And as outrageous as that is, it was sort of for me, a representation of how broken and alone and naked I was. Naked in my truth. That I'm close to death and I need help. And I remember praying to God, and I said, I'm sure that this has been said by many, I said, make me your instrument. Maybe that's the part of the St. Francis prayer, or I don't know who coined it, but it felt right. And that's the words that I used. And I meant it with every ounce of my soul. I meant, I don't care what happens. You could kill me. I could lose all my limbs. I could stop this way of life forever. You could have me move to another country, like whatever insane possibility that would probably never happen. I was willing for it to happen. I was just, when people talk about surrendering your life to God, or in 12-step communities, when they talk about the third step, you turn your will and your life over, that if you're really doing that, then your own life should be none of your opinion. You should have no say about your own life, because there's that much surrendering and relinquishing your narrative on how your life should be. You're just okay with however it unfolds. So just a absurd level of, I don't know if that's faith. I guess it is a type of faith. That was probably the most faith that I had at that point. That whatever was going to happen from that point forward was clearly going to be better than me living my life as an addicted junkie. Because in that silence, my ego had nothing more to say. I had faith in my mind the entire time. My mind said use drugs, I would use drugs. My mind would think do meth, I would do meth. My mind would think terror, and I would feel terror. It was my master. But yet, when we come to the topic of faith, we shake our fists in objection. How could I be faithful to God? It's like, well, as obscure as that is, how is having faith in your addicted mind working out for you? So in that way, I couldn't really argue. And this is all before recovery. This is a natural grace moment. And I just was willing for anything to happen. Whatever that may be, the billions of possibilities that I was contriving in my mind, I said, all of these could be better than how I'm living my life. And I meant it. God, whatever you want me to do, I'm willing to do it. And there's so much power in that. I was finally turning it over to something deeper, higher, whatever you would like to call it, than my finite beliefs that were killing me. And, shortly after, I still used a couple more weeks, but I kept trying, calling rehabs, calling detoxes, calling, maybe I had a desire to travel. I was calling places in Utah, and I got sober in New Jersey. And that's a whole different story. So what I would say to round this out and complete the idea is rock bottom is when your ego's been checkmated and there's no more con to pull, there's no more lie to tell yourself, there's no one else to blame. You in that silence have realized that you truly cannot do this alone, that you are powerless. And that is not something that you do, that's not something that you write down, that is something that is a lived experience as the result of being a slave to addiction for so many years. And it's purely grace. It's purely grace. There's many people that die before they get to that epiphany. And it's something else that's important to note is that that realization, that deafening silence, the ego being checkmated, that isn't enough. Meaning I couldn't ride off that experience alone and still have almost 7 years sober today. I needed to do the 12-step stuff. I needed to do the meditation. I needed to do the exercise, the esteemable acts to grow as a man. Those were all crucial. I needed to have people that I talked to in the community. I needed to continue to pray. I needed to write down about my life. I needed to pray for others. I needed to attend seminars and events. But that was the initial spark in my heart that thought, it was like that old child that said, don't forget about me. I'm still in here. I still love you, Dylan. You're enough. You could do this. But when your mind's here, that only, it speaks louder, barely as loud as a whisper. And that's something that if you're in enough pain, finally your heart can hear it. And I think there are more and more bottoms. I relapsed when I was 21. That was a true bottom. And I think for people that are often, addicts, people in general are worried, but especially addicts. Is this my real bottom? And, if you truly feel that you're powerless, you're going to be scared. That's a good place to be. Because it's not a matter of if you're going to drink or get high again. It's a matter of when. That's what powerlessness means. But if you've had a moment of abstinence and you've cried out from your heart, whether that's to God, to a group of people, however you would like to define it, if you've had that yearning and you're at that point where you can't imagine your life with or without, that is a bottom. and that's a gift. What do they say? The deeper the roots, the taller the tree, or the deeper the hell, the higher you climb to heaven. I don't know if I believe that, but I know that the people that recover are those that have the willingness of a dying man or dying woman, because truly we are. If you're as addicted and powerless as I am, you are a threat to yourself, and it's a matter of time. And I would have the willingness like your life is on the line. And that's hard to find when we've been treating ourselves like our life doesn't matter. How would you fight for preservation of life when all of your actions are to the contrary, trying to kill yourself? And that, for me, is where prayer comes in. Maybe prayer in that way could be looked at as a call to your deepest, most authentic self. It could be a call to God. It could be a call to the high mind, the universal mind, the collaborative consciousness, the universal one. But if you're at that place where you're that broken, I don't see how you could argue against prayer, because you're already killing yourself. So I hope that rambling sums up what a bottom is. And I love you guys. Thank you for watching. Take care.